You, Judge Ray Fisher, just a brief video oral interview to record some of the reflections and background about your career in the law. My name, as you know, is Bill Edlund, and I'm here on behalf of the Ninth Judicial Circuit Historical Society. We do video and oral interviews, and the Society will provide you with a copy of the video for your own use, and we'll ask you to sign an agreement permitting us to use that in the future. So that's, now...
As long as I get all the royalties.
I went to the net and tried to pull some things out about you that I don't know. Many of them I didn't, and I didn't realize that you were born in Northern California, Oakland, California. I'm guessing that it was your father who left maybe teaching there and went to UCLA?
No, he actually, my parents got married while he was getting his PhD in Russian history at Berkeley. And so why they were in Oakland at the time, I'm not real sure, but I was born at Marriott Hospital. He was at Berkeley, and as soon as he finished his PhD shortly after I was born, we moved up to Arcata, California, where Humboldt State College is, and that was his first teaching job. So he was a professor of Russian history there, and I lived up there until I was 5, and then I think, well, I was in, kindergarten. I got through kindergarten, and then he went to the State Department during World War II, and he was on the Russia desk at the State Department. So he went there for a year without the family, and then we moved back a year later, drove cross country. Great trip. And so I spent 2 years in Washington, D.C., and interestingly enough, we lived at a place in Wisconsin called McLean Gardens, which is up near Fannie Mae. And when I went back to the Justice Department in 1997, we wound up living
in McLean Gardens.
Well, not quite, although we did look at an apartment there to see if we could, it was still there. It wasn't, no, we wound up in Georgetown. But it was still, it was like coming full circle. And what's interesting now is that my daughter and her family live in Oakland, and they are basically proximate to where I was born. So I feel like, the whole family has come full circle.
Well, and Meredith Hospital is still there.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah. Well,
That's how I was there.
Let me skip beyond that to your undergraduate work, because I got the impression that you applied to Stanford and probably 3 or 4 other schools.
Not at all.
Just Stanford.
I didn't even apply in the traditional sense. My dad was by then a professor at UCLA. His cousin Harold Bacon was the chair of the math department at Stanford. They decided
I took a course from Dr. Bacon when I was there.
Well, Harold, their house, wonderful house. I'd played in that house. And I didn't want to go to UCLA because my dad taught there. I grew up on that campus, more figuratively speaking. And so my dad and Harold decided Stanford would be appropriate, and that's where I wound up.
Well, at that time, Stanford had a reasonably good football team. The women were all back on the campus, probably more than in the past.
Well, it was still 3 to 1, 4 to 1
Something
ratio.
like that, but there were women there. In the 40s, it was kind of the other way around.
Oh,
for
of course, yeah,
it was
sure,
reversed during
yeah,
the war years.
right.
But you were only there for a year, and it was a wonderful plant and equipment, and you decided you weren't going to continue at Stanford. Tell
Well,
us why.
between high school, when I was at Uni High, I was student body president my last semester, and I graduated mid-year in February. And a friend of mine and I we had decided to join the Army Reserves and use the gap semester, if you will, to get military service behind us.
That was
Right after the Korean War.
6 month active and a
Then-
commitment for another 6.5, 7 years.
Yes, exactly. And so if you got in at that age, you could do 6 months active duty, and then and it was at Fort Ord, and then you could be in the reserves for the rest of a long time, 6.5, 7 years, active reserves. So I did that, and it was a shocking experience in my life because I was student body president literally on Friday. We got a overnight train to Salinas, and I woke up as a buck private in Salinas under the control and abuse of a drill sergeant. And that was a fairly miserable, humiliating, well, humbling for sure, good discipline, good physical conditioning, but it was quite an experience. And I grew up in those 6 months. And so when I got to Stanford, I was put in Wilbur Hall, where all the freshman men were basically housed, cut off from much social interaction with anybody outside the freshman class. All the women were dated up immediately by the upperclassmen. So I was with a bunch of hairy high schools, and I was a veteran, in my thinking. And I didn't take well to Stanford at all. And then I got a bunch of TAs as our professors. One named professor in biology, I can't remember what it was. We'd have a lecture once a week in Memorial Auditorium, and the rest of the time was spent with TAs. And my folks did not have a lot of money. And Stanford wasn't anywhere near as expensive as it is now. But I just decided this is not worth it. I'm not getting that great an education. So I wound, UCSB had just become a university status college, and they had a new chancellor, Sam Gould. And my dad said, why don't you try that? He knew people on the faculty. And I did, and the rest is history. It was a good transfer. I had great teachers. It was not the graduate type school at Stanford. I didn't have any graduate programs, but the teachers were quite good, undergraduate. So I got a great education, I think. That's where I met my wife.
After UC Santa Barbara, as I gather it, you went to work for Pac Bell.
Yep.
And a business career was in the offing. You were with them for a while.
Well, that was interesting, and it's interesting in light our granddaughter graduated from UCSB last year, and when she got out of UCSB with an English and art major, she didn't have any structure about how to get a job. She had not sought a job in the past, in the open market like that. And there wasn't much support. When I graduated from college, women went into education, elementary education, or secondary maybe. And the guys were offered, at least in my level of the academic achievement, were offered Security Pacific bank was hiring bank tellers in a management training program, and Pacific Telephone had a 2-year management training program, and so I opted for that. And I moved back to LA, and I got 2 years in the phone company doing through various management training. It was invaluable part of my background and experience. And I found that I liked the business world, which I had no experience with. I grew up in an academic household. I didn't have any understanding of business. So I enjoyed it. And our son was born during that period. And about 18 months into my experience, and I was moving, they moved me along. I went from installation, or a business office supervisor to an installation foreman to a chief deskman. I knew nothing about the technology, and I was a wet behind the ears punk kid, but I got respect as because of my title, I guess. And they sent me to a public speaking class, as they did with their managers, and I was going through that exercise, and I had this epiphany brought on by a management change at the phone company. A classmate of mine who had also started this program, and he was shooting up the ranks. He was attached and assigned to the 4th level manager in the phone company. It was very high level. And he fell out of favor when a vice president switch brought a new vice president in from San Diego. He came in and he basically got rid of everybody. It didn't fire him. He couldn't fire anybody from the phone company. It was a monopoly, and they never fired
That was
people.
one of the opportunities of working for the phone company.
Well, yeah, it was, but they put him on staff positions. And so that whole chain of command, chain of corporate authority, down to and including the guy who was at my level, got shifted into staff positions. And that's just shocked me. And I said, I cannot be in a situation where that could happen to my career. I had thought of going to law school quite seriously, and I had applied for it too. And that decided me. I was going to go out and get a law degree. And my farewell speech at the Barristers Club restaurant in Eagle Rock to all my fellow management people was why I'm going to law school. And that was my public speech. And they all applauded me at the end of my speech because they thought they agreed with me.
Law school, you did apply to several law schools.
I did.
As I recall from the notes, Stanford,
Cal.
Bolt, or now Berkeley, as it were,
Bolt.
USC, Michigan, and there may have been others. I'm not sure.
That was about it.
And got admitted to all of them.
Yes.
And then, while you were, I guess, close to going to Bolt, which
Yeah.
was by far the best of those 4 schools, in my view.
It was at the time.
At that time,
Yeah.
I think Prosser was still there
Yeah.
as dean, and you didn't end up at Bolt. Why was that?
Warren Christopher. I just got back from a trip to the Galapagos, from Stanford trip, and I was. There were some people on the tour, and the first night we were on the tour, I was walking back from an event, and this woman about younger than I, but more senior than her adult children. And she said, "You know my father, Bill Keogh." And she was Dean Keogh's daughter. And I couldn't believe it because his Bill Keogh, who admitted me to Stanford and asked Warren Christopher to recruit me to Stanford Law School.
Did she give you any more clues? Because you had been at Stanford for a year and you left, and there was some record of that. And Dean Keogh undoubtedly had some reason, other than your being a terribly smart UC Santa Barbara student and being a 2-year Pacific Tel, why he wanted to get you into Stanford.
No, she didn't know that. She never got, of course, I didn't know what my dad did that specifically either in terms of his professional life. But I think it was Chris was very influential at Stanford by that time. And I think they were trying to catch up with Bolt. And I'm sure that was it. I mean, they had, Rehnquist, O'Connor, Hofstadler, really major. They had some major students that preceded me. And I think they were looking to get quality candidates. I didn't know I was a quality candidate. I really didn't. I had some maturity. I had a wife and a child, and I also had spent 2 years, working. So I think I had some life experience, and I was different in that aspect. The thing that swung me on it was that they had married student housing on campus at Stanford, and at Bolt, it was over in Vallejo. And they offered me a full scholarship, so it was as cheap as Bolt. And so that's ultimately why I made the decision. I didn't know who Warren Christopher was. He became a life force in my career, but at the time I didn't know. I was very impressed with him, and that's why I went to Stanford.
Over the years, you and Christopher had interaction on a number of things, and I gather you became friends over a period of time.
Very much so.
In talking to some of his former colleagues at school, and I did not know him well. He participated in a deposition once that I was involved in, but they said he was a pretty stolid person, not too humorous. In fact, one of my colleagues said he was kind of a cigar store Indian. You couldn't get too much movement out of him. What's your reaction?
Well, I think your description is a little more pejorative than I would. He played the cards very close to the vest. He kept his own counsel. He had a great sense of humor. Very dry. He's from North Dakota. He was, reflected his upbringing, I'm pretty sure. But he was very much a strategic kind of thinker. He kept his counsel, as I say, and so people, when he did speak, people would listen. Now, I've never been guilty of holding my tongue. I can't wait, because I'm afraid if I don't say anything, they'll ignore me. He didn't seem to have that problem, and so a lot of us, I suppose, could emulate Chris, but that played out over his entire career. He was very serious, but when he recruited me, he wasn't backslapping or anything like that. He made me feel I was dealing with somebody who was a very serious lawyer, and I've always probably intimidated by Chris most of my relationship with him. Never knew exactly what he was thinking. Always wanted to be careful what I said. in his later years, when we both wound up in Santa Barbara with second homes, Chris and Marie and Nancy and I became frequent dinner companions. So over the last 5 years of his life, we probably had dinner with them more than any other couple socially. And Chris was very much a listener. He would not disclose state secrets, if you will, or political secrets. He always was discreet, but he was a very warm and very sensitive person. He was very interested in Nancy, my wife's, teaching career. And of course, his legacy is the Christopher Scholars program O'Melveny set up, and they fund at-risk high school students. They identify them early on. They're bright students, and then they pay for 4 years of their college. They give them a stipend. They don't pay for the whole thing. And that program just epitomizes Chris. He was very interested in young people, and in his later years. And I've always respected Chris's judgments. He was a very cautious man. But
After you finished law school, you had the opportunity and privilege of clerking for a couple of very fine judges, Scalia and then Justice Brennan at the Supreme Court. How would you compare their judicial philosophies?
to whom? As between each other, or
Well, to us.
oh, well, in those days, that was the height of the Warren Court, of course, and they were in the process of incorporating the Bill of Rights to the 14th Amendment to apply it to the states. Scalia Wright, I did not know his history at all. I went back, Keith Mann, who was my mentor at Stanford.
He was a labor lawyer, though.
He was, and I took labor law. I wrote a paper for him as a part of my final procedure, final year on the Taft-Hartley Act. So anyway, clerkship was not a big deal in those days. It was not widespread. I was president of the Law Review, so I had some qualifications. I originally interviewed for the Douglas clerkship, and thank God I didn't get that. And then I decided I wanted to either go to LA or I wanted to go to DC and practice. And I was very interested in politics and in the what was going on in DC. So I applied to David Bazelon on the DC circuit, and I got an interview. So I went back to interview him, and I got to his chambers all prepped and everything, nervous, and he walks in the door and he says, "Oh, why are you here?" And I said, "Oh," he said, "yes, well, I don't have a clerkship anymore. I just filled my second slot this morning. But Skelly down the hallway, I think he still has an opening." And I said, "Who's that?" I said it to myself. And that's how I met Judge Wright. And that was the best thing that happened to me in my legal career at that point. He was a wonderful man, and because of my clerkship with Skelly, I wound up getting the clerkship with Justice Brennan, because that's a side story I won't clutter the record with. But in any event, he was disaffected with Harvard Law School. So I was the first Stanford law clerk he ever hired. And the Skelly Wright Bill Brennan relationship was, unbeknownst to me, quite close with each other. They were both quite liberal by today's standards, for sure. Brennan probably a little more moderate than Skelly, who had come out of New Orleans. He was on the D.C. Circuit because he ordered the desegregation of LSU and the law school, and he couldn't get confirmed to the Fifth Circuit, so Kennedy put him on the D.C. Circuit. And Skelly was an unabashed liberal. And we had the D.C. school desegregation case that year, Hobson versus Hanson. So most of what I did for 6 months was work as a district court clerk, because Skelly was trying the case. And that was my initiation into school desegregation law. And then I wound up clerking for Brennan, and we had the freedom of choice cases, and I worked on those for Brennan. So that was another major step in the post-Brown versus Board of Education evolution. And interestingly enough, I also worked on Terry versus Ohio, which is a case that I apply routinely and frequently in my current job and have been for years. And I helped draft parts of that opinion for the justice. It's a Warren opinion, but it's an opinion that Bill Brennan had substantial input to. So that was the height of the Warren court and the height, quite frankly, of Bill Brennan's influence on the court. And it was, I just hit the jackpot with both judges.
The current chief, at least in his confirmation hearing, said job should be calling balls and strikes. How would you compare that to either Wright or Brennan?
Well, the analogy that the Chief Justice Roberts drew, I think he invoked that once again recently, but I think he's put a qualifier on it, and I won't try to paraphrase it. But my reaction at the time was, no, empires don't define the strike zone. And the Supreme Court, when it's deciding cases, also winds up defining the strike zone, and then it may call the balls and strikes in that. No, I think judging is a process of taking the facts and the law, which is inherently ambiguous. I don't care what clear statement of the law is put in a statute, and it's certainly not precise in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And to say that there's a clear answer in every case. You can find ambiguities in the written word all the time. The question is, are the ambiguities reasonable ambiguities, or are you exploiting them? This recent case on the Affordable Care Act is a case in point where I think it was clear that Congress made a legislative goof. And you can construe those words as the Chief Justice did to accord with the intent of Congress, or if it's a Constitution, the intent of framers. Brennan clearly articulated and believed in a living Constitution. He is not an originalist. He doesn't go back and try and decipher what the framers would have done with this current problem. It's principles, and I subscribe to that. So trying to call that process simple matter of calling balls and strikes is just doesn't do justice to what one tries to do. You try to do it properly and in a principled basis, but I have rarely found a decision that I've made to be absolutely crystal clear that I couldn't make the argument on the other side. It's just the argument isn't persuasive, but there are many, many, many cases where it's real close, and some of my toughest opinions have been trying to decide which side of the equation to come out on.
You can always find an authority to support the
You
argument.
can if you read them. Yes, you can distort an authority too, and there are plenty of judges who do that, who milk an authority and find ambiguities to avoid it or misapply it. So you have to be principled. I do agree with the Chief Justice in the sense of you don't want to just impose your own, naked reading on it. There's also a big difference between being an intermediate court of appeal and being the final word. And I felt that as a law clerk. I mean, I drafted opinions for Skelly Wright, and he had his own strong views about things, and he would follow his dictates. But he was subject to supervision or reversal. Now, probably not by the Warren Court, but he certainly would have been today. And certainly we are supervised in the Ninth Circuit and not infrequently reversed because they just disagree, or a majority do, 5-4. A lot of the reversals are 5-4. That means 4 people agreed with us. And so I think you have to be principled, but you have to make difficult choices all the time.
After you finished your clerkship with Justice Brennan, you decided, I think, that you were going to return to Los Angeles and practice there. And at least the notes about you indicate that you had opportunities at Tuttle and Taylor and Munger Tolles, and probably, I'm guessing, several other law firms in Los
Latham and
Angeles at the
Watkins.
time.
Yeah.
I mean, your career cachet was outstanding. How did you go about selecting Tuttle and Taylor?
Well, Warren Christopher played a big role in that, once again. It's, in retrospect, it's somewhat ironic, but by then by the end of my Brennan clerkship, I had 2 children. In fact, I had 2 children when I left Stanford during the Bar Association. Our daughter was born during the bar exam, so that was an experience. So I was very serious about having a career. I wanted to try D.C., as I said, and having been there for 2 years, of course, the firms were making offers as soon as I got there. They wanted to hire me, Covington and Wilmer and Arnold and Porter were wanting to hire me in the fall, in which I just started. So I didn't have any basis to make a decision then. Of course, by then we had grandparents, my parents and Nancy's parents were grandparents, and they very much wanted us to be out in California, where both of them were located. So that was a big pull. On the other hand, I found Washington, D.C. fascinating. So when it came down to the end, I had an offer from Tuttle and Taylor, I had an offer from Latham and Watkins, and an offer from Munger Tolles. And I wanted a small firm. I wasn't interested in O'Melveny or Gibson Dunn at that point. So I went to Chris to seek his advice, and he was Deputy Attorney General. And he said, well, Ray, this goes back to your earlier question about Chris and his demeanor. Very soberly said, I think those are both, it was down to, at that point, to Tuttle and Taylor and Munger Tolles. And he said, well, the thing you have to consider in a law firm is where does their business come from? And Tuttle and Taylor has a very good corporate base. Bob Tuttle, Ed Tuttle and Bob Taylor are very fine corporate lawyers. And Munger Tolles is a very good litigation firm, but they don't really have the corporate clientele, so that is something you may want to take into account. Now, of course, what Chris didn't appreciate, and certainly I didn't for a long time, that Munger Tolles had Warren Buffett. And subsequently, all of Tuttle and Taylor's corporate clients moved out of LA and were absorbed. So, but that's why I chose Tuttle and Taylor. And so that's one irony about Warren Buffett and Munger Tolles. But the other is, Chris also offered me a job as a special assistant. He offered me the opportunity to stay another, what I thought would be 2 years in Washington, working for him in the Justice Department. And I turned him down because I just felt I couldn't do another stint in government at those low wages and be away from the families that long. And of course, years later, I wind up as the third-ranking person in the Justice Department with no prior Justice Department experience. So life plays funny tricks.
There are a lot of questions and subjects that I want to cover with you, but I'm going to just mention a couple and hope that I can get your promise that you'll sit for an oral history where we're not limited on time in the future.
Only if you take the paintings down.
Your confirmation hearing. I've talked to others who have gone through that hearing, and there's a preparation for them. What kind of preparation did you do for your confirmation hearing?
As a judge?
As a
Well,
judge.
keep in mind, I'd already gone through an intensive preparation to get my job as Associate Attorney General. And that's one reason President Clinton selected me for the Ninth Circuit. I'd already been confirmed. And because it was not a life tenure, but it was at the Justice Department, I got briefed heavily and for the Associate Attorney General, because I had civil rights and antitrust and all, environment and whatever else I had under my jurisdiction, which was substantial. And so it was the same Judiciary Committee, basically, that I'd gone through before. And the civil rights issues, school desegregation was the big issue when I was, that's what held up the civil rights nominee, Bill Land Lee. So I'd gone through that, and so for the Ninth Circuit, it really wasn't a lot of preparation that they had to do for me. What I had to do was generate enough support to get the Republicans either neutralized or favorable to appoint me to the Ninth Circuit.
And they were hot. I mean, they rejected one of your other colleagues who was up for confirmation at that time, the Missouri Supreme Court.
Well, that was an interesting deal. That's how I got it. The backstory to all of that is that Marcia Berzon and Richard Paez were hung up in their nomination. And so when David Thompson in San Diego, where we are now, when senior, unbeknownst to me, that was even in the cards. I got the call, and they said they wanted somebody who was not identified with any part of California at that point, because they didn't have anybody from San Diego that they felt they wanted to appoint. And I wouldn't be viewed as an LA lawyer. And they thought, now I have no idea what the rationale was, but they thought that if I could get confirmed, that would break the logjam with Marcia and Richard. And so it seemed a strategy, but it wasn't going anywhere. And I happened to fly up to Boston with Eric to make a presentation against the modification of the rules of discovery that was under consideration. And at the time, David Levy was chairing that committee. And the American College of Trial Lawyers was very supportive of the amendments. And so I went up with a mandate to voice the objections of the Justice Department, particularly Environmental Division, which really didn't like them. So I was walking because the Civil Division did like them and whatever. So I was a member of the, one of two members of the American College of Trial Lawyers in the Justice Department. The other was Frank Hunger, Al Gore's brother-in-law, and he was also he was the other member of the ACTL, and Frank was all for these amendments. So Eric and I flew up. There were civil amendments, so Eric didn't know that much about them, and I put on this spirited argument on behalf of the Environmental Division, and I lost unanimously. The big storm. Eric and I have to get back to D.C. because one of the top three has to be in D.C., and Janet was about to leave that evening. Eric and I are up in Boston. There's a big storm, and they cancel the airplane. So we go over to Delta, and we get on the last minute. We get a flight down on Delta flying, and I wind up sitting next to this fellow who's a member of, he was the representative of the ACTL at that, and he said, you know, I really respected what you said. And I said, well, thank you very much. And he said, I've heard good things about it. Well, that's very nice, he said. And I'd been nominated by then, so. And he said, I said, you know, if you're in D.C., let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Well, he said, I may be helpful to you. I'm going down to, I'm Orrin Hatch's personal lawyer. And Tony Murray had spoken to him in my favor, unbeknownst to me, and within a couple of days, he wrote a letter to Orrin Hatch, that is, this fellow, recommending me to Orrin Hatch. Within a few days after that, the package emerged of a district court nominee in Salt Lake City that Hatch wanted confirmed. Ronnie White, who was the African-American Supreme Court Justice from Missouri, and me. We were a package deal. And so that package deal went to the floor fairly promptly, and Ashcroft reneged on it overnight. He decided to put the screws to White because he had voted against the death penalty, or in favor of, against the death penalty in a particular case. And so the way that came up was that White went first, and he was knocked out. And I felt that there goes my chances. The Democrats will never hold to the deal with Hatch, but they did. And so the Hatch candidate got confirmed, and then I went through, and Jeff Sessions got up on the floor, this is on C-SPAN, only a few of us were watching at the time. And he gets up and he comes on screen. You know, it's a fixed, just like this, a fixed camera. And he shows up and he said, "Well, I voted to confirm Mr. Fisher for the head of the civil division." And he stops and looks off camera and he disappears. And he never came back. And I was confirmed after that. And that was Orrin Hatch saying, "A deal's a deal." And that's how I got on the Ninth Circuit.
69 to 29.
Is that what it was?
That
I
was
never
the
even
vote.
got, yeah, was that it?
That was the vote, so it went on.
Yeah.
I think they're telling
More than
me
you
that
wanted.
we have used our half hour.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, Judge Fisher. And I do hope you tell me what paintings you'd like removed, and we'll do that.
Thank you.
I didn't get a chance to ask this.